Family is supposed to be where respect begins. But what if it's where your self-respect slowly disappears? What if staying close is costing you your peace, your voice, and your sense of self? And what if walking away isn't betrayal, but survival? Most people are taught that family must be endured at all costs, that loyalty means silence, that respect means tolerance. But Stoicism offers a harder, more honest truth. The Stoics never taught blind obedience to roles or bloodlines. They taught devotion to virtue, reason, and inner integrity. Marcus Aurelius wrote not about pleasing others, but about protecting the character of your soul, even when the pressure comes from those closest to you. Sometimes, the real damage doesn't come from enemies. It comes from staying too long where you are not seen, not heard, and not respected. And today, we're exploring a brutal Stoic truth most people are afraid to face. Sometimes, distance from family is not rejection, it's self-respect. If you value inner peace over approval, stay with me. 1. Stoicism is about virtue, not blood. Most people grow up believing that family automatically deserves loyalty, patience, and unlimited access to their lives. The unspoken rule is simple. Blood comes first, no matter the cost. But Stoicism challenges this assumption at its core. It asks a different, far more uncomfortable question. Not who someone is to you, but who you become around them. For the Stoics, virtue was the highest good. Not approval, not harmony at any price, not keeping the peace by betraying yourself. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that a good life is built on character, on wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. None of these virtues are guaranteed by family ties, and none of them should be sacrificed just because someone shares your name or your history. Blood creates a relationship, and it does not create moral authority. Stoicism makes a sharp distinction between roles and values. You may be a son, a daughter, a sibling, but these roles do not override your duty to live with integrity. When a family dynamic constantly pulls you into guilt, anger, fear, or self-doubt, Stoicism does not praise endurance for endurance's sake. It warns against it, because what slowly corrodes your character also erodes your freedom. Many people confuse tolerance with virtue. They stay quiet to avoid conflict. They explain away disrespect as just how they are. They accept emotional manipulation because family means well. But from a Stoic perspective, this is not moral strength, it is moral confusion. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But he also knew that repeated exposure to corrosive environments shapes who we become. Pay attention to this question. Do you leave these interactions more grounded or more fractured? If your sense of worth shrinks every time you're around them, something essential is being violated. Stoicism teaches that no one can harm your inner self without your consent. But consent can be given quietly through endurance without boundaries. Over time, this kind of consent teaches your nervous system that disrespect is normal. And once that happens, self-respect begins to disappear. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should not waste our lives reacting to the faults of others. But that does not mean remaining trapped in them. It means refusing to let them dictate your inner state. And there is a difference between patience and self-abandonment. One strengthens the soul, the other drains it. Family can be a source of support, wisdom, and growth. Stoicism does not deny this, but when family becomes a source of chronic chaos, manipulation, or quiet humiliation, the Stoic response is not blind loyalty. It is clear-eyed evaluation. Virtue cannot flourish in an environment that constantly demands you betray your own reason. Here is the brutal truth. If being a good son or a good daughter requires you to become a smaller, quieter, less honest version of yourself, then the role itself has become corrupted. Stoicism is not cold, It is not heartless. It is disciplined compassion, starting with compassion for your own moral health. You are not obligated to destroy your character to preserve a title, because you are not required to trade self-respect for belonging. The Stoics believed that character is destiny, and character is shaped by proximity. Who you allow close to you matters, not because they define you, but because they influence the conditions under which you live and grow. In the Stoic view, the ultimate loyalty is not to blood. It is to virtue, and any relationship, family included, that consistently pulls you away from that path deserves serious, honest distance. 2. The hidden cost of staying too long. There is a quiet kind of damage that comes from remaining in places you have outgrown. It doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates slowly, almost invisibly, until one day you realize you no longer recognize yourself. Stoicism warns us about this kind of erosion, not because pain itself is unbearable, but because prolonged, unnecessary pain reshapes the soul. Many people stay in harmful family dynamics out of habit, guilt, or fear of being judged. They tell themselves that endurance is strength, that tolerating disrespect is maturity, that silence is the price of peace. But Stoicism draws a clear line between meaningful hardship and needless suffering. Not all pain builds character. Some pain simply wears it down. The first cost of staying too long is self-doubt. When your feelings are consistently dismissed, mocked, or minimized, you begin to question your own perceptions. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you overreacted, if you're too sensitive, if the problem is really you. Over time, this internal questioning becomes a habit, and once you no longer trust your own judgment, you surrender one of the core pillars of Stoic strength: reason. The second cost is emotional numbness. To survive repeated tension, many people learn to shut down. They become quieter, less expressive, less alive. This numbness may feel like resilience, but it is not. It is self-protection taken too far. The Stoics valued apatheia, not the absence of feeling, but freedom from destructive emotions. Emotional numbness is not freedom. It is a warning sign that something inside you is retreating. And the third cost is the slow betrayal of your values. You laugh at comments that cross your boundaries. You accept behavior you would never tolerate from anyone else. You stay because leaving would make you the bad one. Each compromise seems small in isolation, but together they form a pattern, and that pattern teaches you that your values are negotiable when pressure is applied. Stoicism does not glorify this kind of endurance. Epictetus was clear: if something is damaging your moral purpose, your ability to think clearly and act with integrity, it must be examined, not excused. Endurance has meaning only when it serves virtue. When it does not, it becomes self-harm disguised as loyalty. Consider how your body reacts before these interactions. The tightness in your chest, the rehearsed responses, the exhaustion that follows. These are not signs of weakness, they are signals. The Stoics believed nature constantly communicates with us. Ignoring these signals does not make you virtuous. It makes you disconnected. There is also the cost of lost time. Time spent managing dysfunction is time not spent growing, learning, or resting. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that life is short and that wasting it on unnecessary turmoil is a form of negligence. Every hour spent bracing for conflict is an hour stolen from your own development. Many people justify staying by saying, "This is just how families are." But Stoicism does not accept inevitability without examination. Just because something is common does not mean it is healthy. Just because it is familiar does not mean it is right. Wisdom begins where unquestioned norms end. Ask yourself this honestly. Are you staying because it aligns with your values, or because leaving feels terrifying? Fear is not a compass. Neither is guilt. The Stoics taught that clarity comes from observing outcomes, not intentions. If staying consistently leaves you smaller, angrier, or depleted, then the cost is already being paid. You're just paying it quietly. Here is the hard realization most people reach too late. Staying too long doesn't preserve relationships. It distorts them. It replaces honesty with resentment, presence with performance, love with obligation. And none of these lead to peace. Stoicism is not about enduring everything. It is about enduring what is worthy. And when the cost of staying is your self-respect, the price is simply too high. 3. When distance becomes a moral act. For many people, the idea of stepping back from family feels immediately wrong. Distance is often framed as coldness, abandonment, or punishment. But Stoicism asks us to look beyond appearances and examine intention and consequence. It challenges the assumption that physical or emotional closeness is always virtuous. In some cases, distance is not an escape from responsibility, it is an act of moral clarity. The Stoics believed that the highest responsibility we have is to preserve the integrity of our character. Epictetus taught that while we cannot control how others behave, we are fully responsible for what we allow to shape our inner life. When a relationship repeatedly undermines your ability to act with reason, honesty, and self-command, continuing it without boundaries is not moral endurance, and it is quiet surrender. Distance, in the Stoic sense, is not about anger or revenge. It is not a dramatic gesture meant to prove a point. It is a deliberate response to information. You observe patterns. You communicate when possible. You set boundaries, and when those boundaries are ignored, distance becomes the natural next step, not to harm the other person, but to protect what is essential within yourself. Think of how you respond to physical danger. If a substance makes you sick, you stop consuming it. If a place causes repeated harm, you avoid it. No one calls this cruelty. It is considered wisdom. Yet when the harm is emotional or psychological, people are told to endure indefinitely, especially when family is involved. Stoicism rejects this double standard. Harm is harm, regardless of its source. Yet there is a crucial distinction the Stoics make between love and access. You can care about someone and still limit their influence over your life. Love does not require proximity at any cost. Respect does not demand unlimited exposure. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to remove yourself from a dynamic that brings out the worst in both of you. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should meet others with understanding, knowing that they act according to their own nature. But he also warned against allowing their behavior to disrupt our inner order. Compassion does not mean self-sacrifice without limit. True compassion includes honesty about what is and is not sustainable. Distance becomes a moral act when it prevents further corruption of character. When staying would require constant lying, pretending, or suppressing your truth, leaving becomes an act of alignment. It restores coherence between your values and your actions. And in Stoicism, coherence is a form of virtue. This is especially difficult because distance is often misunderstood. Others may label you selfish, ungrateful, or cruel. Stoicism prepares you for this. It teaches that external judgments are not a reliable measure of moral worth. What matters is whether your actions are guided by reason and aimed at preserving virtue, not whether they are applauded. There is also a quieter benefit to distance: clarity. When you step away, patterns become easier to see. You recognize how much energy was being drained, how often you were bracing yourself, how little space you had to simply be. This clarity is not bitterness. It is information. And when Stoicism is built on responding wisely to what reality reveals, distance does not have to be permanent. It does not have to be absolute, but it must be honest. It must be chosen deliberately, not out of impulse or fear, and it must be rooted in self-respect rather than resentment. Here is the Stoic truth many avoid. Sometimes, remaining close is the immoral choice. Not because the other person is evil, but because the relationship itself has become incompatible with a life of virtue. When that happens, distance is not a rejection of love. It is a refusal to abandon yourself. Stoicism teaches us to act in accordance with nature and reason sometimes says, step back, protect your inner order, preserve your character. In those moments, distance is not weakness, it is moral strength. 4. Guilt is not a moral compass. Guilt is one of the most powerful forces keeping people trapped in harmful family dynamics. It whispers that you are selfish for wanting space, that you are cruel for choosing peace, that suffering is the price of being a good person. But Stoicism draws a sharp distinction between moral responsibility and conditioned guilt, and confusing the two can quietly destroy your life. The Stoics never treated guilt as proof of wrongdoing. They treated reason as the judge. Epictetus taught that emotions arise from judgments, not events themselves. In other words, guilt does not mean you have done something wrong. It means you have been taught to associate certain choices with shame. This distinction is critical, because many people feel guilty not because they violated a moral principle, but because they violated an expectation. Family expectations are often internalized early. Be patient, be grateful, don't upset anyone, don't make waves. Over time, these lessons harden into invisible rules. Breaking them triggers guilt automatically, even when the action itself is reasonable and necessary. Stoicism asks you to examine these rules instead of obeying them blindly. Ask yourself this: did I act unjustly, or did I simply disappoint someone? These are not the same thing. Justice, in Stoic terms, means acting fairly and honestly, including toward yourself. If creating distance prevents ongoing harm and allows you to live more truthfully, guilt alone is not evidence of moral failure. It is evidence of conditioning. The Stoics also warned against outsourcing your conscience, and Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that living well requires inner agreement with one's own principles, not constant reassurance from others. When guilt becomes your primary guide, you're no longer living by reason. You're living by fear of judgment, rejection, or abandonment. There is a cruel irony here. Many people endure years of disrespect to avoid feeling guilty, only to wake up exhausted, resentful, and disconnected from themselves. Stoicism recognizes this pattern as a kind of self-betrayal, not dramatic, not intentional, but deeply corrosive. Guilt fades when it is no longer reinforced. Self-respect, on the other hand, compounds. Each time you act in alignment with your values, your inner stability grows. You begin to trust yourself again. You stop explaining your choices endlessly, and you stop needing permission to protect your peace. This does not mean acting without care. Stoicism does not encourage cruelty or indifference. It encourages clarity. If distance is chosen thoughtfully, communicated calmly, and maintained without malice, guilt has no moral authority. Pain may still exist, but pain is not the same as wrongdoing. A useful Stoic exercise is this: write down exactly what you feel guilty about, then ask whether it violates wisdom, justice, courage, or temperance. If it does not, the guilt is informational, not moral. It tells you where old programming still lives. Nothing more. Another hard truth. Some people benefit from your guilt. It keeps you compliant. It keeps the dynamic unchanged. Stoicism asks you to notice this without hatred. Awareness is enough. Once you see how guilt is used, it loses its power. You are not obligated to carry emotional burdens that were never meant to be yours. You are not responsible for managing other people's discomfort at the expense of your integrity, and you are not immoral for choosing a life that allows you to breathe. In the Stoic view, conscience is quiet. It is steady. It does not scream in panic. If your guilt feels loud, frantic, and punishing, it is likely not conscience at all. It is fear wearing moral language. Here is the reframe that changes everything. Guilt is a signal to examine your values, not a command to betray them. When you let reason lead instead of guilt, something remarkable happens. The noise settles. The path becomes clearer. And for the first time in a long while, your choices begin to feel like your own. That is not selfishness. That is self-respect. 5. Cutting off is not the first move. Stoicism is often misunderstood as extreme or unforgiving, but in truth, it is deeply measured. It does not rush toward drastic action. It values restraint, patience, and clear judgment. That is why, from a Stoic perspective, cutting off family is never the first move. It is the final one, taken only after reason has been fully exercised. The Stoics believed in responding to reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Before creating distance, they would ask, have I acted with clarity? Have I given this situation a fair chance to change? Walking away without reflection is impulsive. Staying without limits is self-destructive. Stoicism stands between the two. The first step is communication, calm, direct, and honest. Not emotional outbursts, not rehearsed speeches meant to win an argument. Simply stating what behavior is unacceptable and what you need in order to continue the relationship. This is not about changing others. It is about making your position clear. Marcus Aurelius warned against wasting energy trying to control people, but he never advised silence in the face of harm. The second step is boundaries. A boundary is not a threat. It is not punishment. It is a statement of consequence. If this continues, I will step back. Boundaries reveal truth. They show whether someone is capable of respecting limits or whether they rely on your compliance to maintain the relationship. In Stoic terms, boundaries are experiments. They provide data. The third step is observation. This is where many people deceive themselves. They listen to apologies instead of patterns. They focus on intentions instead of outcomes. Stoicism teaches radical realism. Words matter far less than repeated behavior. If nothing changes after clear communication and boundaries, then the situation has answered you. No further debate is required. This process takes courage. It is far easier to stay silent and endure than to speak calmly and risk conflict. But Stoicism defines courage not as aggression, but as the willingness to face discomfort in service of virtue. Avoiding conflict at the cost of self-respect is not peace. It is avoidance. Only after these steps, communication, boundaries, and observation, does distance become justified. At that point, it is no longer reactive. It is rational. You're not cutting someone off because you are angry. You are stepping back because the evidence is clear. The relationship, as it currently exists, requires you to compromise your values. This distinction matters. Distance chosen too early feels unstable. Distance chosen too late feels devastating. Distance chosen at the right moment feels steady, even if it is painful. The Stoics trusted this steadiness. They believed that when action aligns with reason, inner conflict decreases, not increases. It is also important to understand that distance can take many forms. It does not always mean permanent separation. Sometimes it means fewer conversations, shorter visits, clearer limits, less emotional availability. Stoicism does not demand extremes. It demands honesty. Marcus Aurelius advised himself to be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. That strictness includes refusing to lie to yourself about what is happening. If repeated chances have been given and repeatedly ignored, that continuing to hope for change is no longer compassionate. It is naive. Here is the uncomfortable truth. When boundaries are ignored, distance becomes the message. It communicates what words could not, and unlike arguments, distance does not escalate. It simply clarifies. This does not make you heartless. It makes you responsible. Responsible for the state of your mind. Responsible for the quality of your life. Responsible for the example you set, both for yourself and for others. Stoicism is not about severing bonds lightly. It is about refusing to live in contradiction. When you have acted with clarity, restraint, and patience, and the harm continues, stepping back is no longer an overreaction. It is a conclusion. And in Stoic terms, a conclusion reached through reason is not something to apologize for. 6. Peace is the proof you chose. Right after distance is created, many people expect immediate relief. And sometimes it comes. But more often, peace arrives quietly, almost unnoticed, after the noise has finally settled. In Stoicism, peace is not an emotional high. It is a state of alignment, and when it appears after a difficult decision, it is often the clearest sign that the decision was guided by reason. The Stoics did not chase happiness. They aimed for tranquility, the calm that comes from living in accordance with virtue. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a well-ordered mind is one that is not pulled apart by unnecessary disturbances. When you remove yourself from a dynamic that constantly provokes anxiety, defensiveness, or self-doubt, the mind begins to return to its natural balance. But one of the first signs of this peace is the absence of constant anticipation. You no longer rehearse conversations in your head. You no longer brace yourself before phone calls or gatherings. The background tension that once felt normal starts to fade. What replaces it is not excitement, but spaciousness. And in that space, clarity grows. Another sign is the return of energy. Toxic dynamics drain vitality because they demand constant vigilance. You are always adjusting, explaining, or defending. When that burden is lifted, energy becomes available again. For work, for relationships that nourish you, for solitude that restores you. The Stoics understood energy as a moral resource. Wasting it on needless turmoil was, to them, a form of poor stewardship. Peace also shows itself through consistency. Your mood becomes less reactive, and your self-image stabilizes. You stop oscillating between guilt and resentment. This steadiness is not emotional numbness. It is emotional coherence. You feel what you feel, but those feelings no longer control you. Epictetus would have called this freedom. Importantly, peace does not mean the absence of sadness. You may still grieve what you hoped the relationship could have been. Stoicism does not deny grief. It teaches proportion. You allow sadness without letting it dismantle your life. You acknowledge loss without turning it into self-punishment. Some people mistake peace for indifference. It is not. Peace is attentiveness without entanglement. You can still care without being consumed. You can still wish others well without allowing them access to your inner world. This distinction is subtle but essential. No, the Stoics believed that inner order was the foundation of all ethical action. Peace also brings a form of self-trust that is difficult to explain until it is experienced. You realize that you can survive disapproval, that you can withstand misunderstanding, that your worth does not collapse when others are unhappy with your choices. This realization is deeply empowering. It breaks the cycle of people-pleasing at its root. Over time, peace becomes its own confirmation. You no longer need to justify your decision endlessly, even to yourself. The quiet speaks for itself. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the best revenge is not to be like those who harm you. Peace is the ultimate expression of this principle. It is a refusal to carry forward what damaged you. If you find that peace is increasing rather than diminishing, that your life feels more honest and less fragmented, Stoicism would say you are moving in the right direction. Virtue leaves a particular trace in the soul. It simplifies rather than complicates. It steadies rather than agitates. Here is the Stoic conclusion. Many people reach only after years of struggle. Peace is not weakness, it is evidence. Evidence that you stopped negotiating with what was harming you. Evidence that you chose alignment over approval. Evidence that you honored your responsibility to yourself. In Stoicism, the proof of a good decision is not applause, it is inner order. And when peace follows your choice, it is not something to doubt, it is something to trust. 7. What Stoicism actually asks of you. Stoicism is often reduced to a set of emotional defenses. Be calm, be strong, don't react. But this is a shallow reading. At its core, Stoicism is not about suppressing feeling or cutting people off. It is about living in agreement with reason and virtue, even when doing so is uncomfortable. And when it comes to family, this demand becomes especially challenging. Stoicism does not ask you to harden your heart, it asks you to examine it. It does not command you to abandon relationships, it asks whether those relationships allow you to live honestly, courageously, and justly. The Stoics understood that our closest bonds shape us more than any philosophy ever could. That is why they treated proximity as a moral decision. Seneca wrote that we must choose carefully whom we allow into our lives. So because character spreads. This is not cynicism, it is realism. If a relationship consistently pulls you toward fear, resentment, or self-erasure, Stoicism does not praise your endurance. It questions your judgment. Virtue cannot thrive where you are required to betray yourself repeatedly. What Stoicism actually asks is simple, but not easy. It asks you to take responsibility for your inner life, to stop blaming circumstances, roles, or expectations for choices that quietly drain you. To recognize that while you did not choose your family, you do choose how much influence they have over your character. This philosophy also demands humility. You must accept that you cannot fix everyone, that your patience will not heal every wound, that some people are not capable of meeting you where virtue requires. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to accept the nature of others without resentment. Acceptance, however, is not the same as submission. Stoicism invites you to act from principle, not impulse. To choose distance only after clarity, to maintain boundaries without cruelty, to let go without hatred. These are not signs of emotional coldness. They are signs of moral maturity. Anyone can react. Few can act with restraint. Importantly, Stoicism also asks you to look inward. Are you seeking distance to avoid discomfort or to preserve integrity? Are you acting from resentment or from reason? The difference matters. One leads to further fragmentation, the other leads to peace. Stoicism does not absolve you of self-examination. It demands it. There is also the question of courage. It takes courage to be misunderstood, courage to disappoint, and courage to stand alone in your values when familiar structures fall away. The Stoics revered this kind of courage, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and steady. The courage to live truthfully without needing constant validation. In the end, Stoicism does not provide a universal rule about family. It provides a framework, a lens through which you evaluate each situation honestly. It asks, does this relationship support the kind of person you are trying to become? If the answer is no, then distance is not a failure. It is a form of responsibility. Stoicism also leaves room for compassion. You can acknowledge others' limitations without excusing harm. You can release anger without reopening excess. You can wish people well without sacrificing your well-being. These are not contradictions, they are refinements of wisdom. And here is what Stoicism ultimately asks of you: to live deliberately, to choose virtue over comfort, to protect your inner order, even when doing so costs you approval. You do not owe anyone access to your soul. You owe yourself honesty. And when your choices reflect that honesty, Stoicism would say you are not walking away from love. You are walking toward integrity. Throughout this video, we've explored a difficult but essential Stoic truth: that self-respect is not measured by how much you endure, but by how faithfully you live in alignment with your values. We examined why virtue matters more than blood, how staying too long can quietly erode your character, why distance can become a moral act, and how guilt often disguises itself as conscience. We saw that cutting off family is never the first move, but when peace follows distance, it is often the clearest proof that reason led the way. Stoicism does not ask you to act impulsively or without compassion. It asks you to observe honestly, set boundaries clearly, and choose integrity over obligation. If there is one practice to take from this, let it be this: regularly examine your relationships. Notice how you feel after them. Ask whether they support the person you're trying to become, and have the courage to adjust what no longer aligns. You don't need to rush any decision. Reflection itself is a Stoic act. Small, deliberate steps taken with clarity are far more powerful than dramatic gestures driven by emotion. Thank you for spending this time with me and for engaging with a topic that requires both honesty and strength. If this video helped you see your situation more clearly, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. And if you're on a journey toward a calmer, more grounded life, I invite you to stay connected. Until next time, choose virtue, protect your inner peace, and live with intention.